to the Doomloop Dispatch, the show covering the worst parts of the San Francisco Bay Area. My name's Kevin L. Jones. This is the third episode. The sun is out, so there's a lot to be happy about. But then I wouldn't be doing this show if people just stopped being awful. So let's begin with some headlines. uh, First, I wanted to avoid talking about San Francisco this episode, but I could not avoid discussing what is happening in the District 5 supervisor race. Bilal Mahmoud, who joined the race back in January, made a big deal about him being a neuroscientist. It was on his website, it's on his social media, it's even in his ads. But now his campaign is deleting those bits because, according to SFist, a group of actual neuroscientists tried to verify his claims and couldn't. They sent him a letter earlier this month telling him as much, and despite the scrubbing, the SFist found quite a few artifacts. My favorite is the screenshot from one of his campaign ads that just says, Bilal Mahmoud, neuroscientist, period. I mean, that's a huge period, too. They really meant it. Mahmoud's campaign hasn't yet responded to questions about the claim, but either way, it's weird. For one, Mahmoud's resume is actually already pretty remarkable. He went to Stanford, he sold a startup, and then he ran for California Assembly seat the following year. I mean, do you really need to add neuroscientists on top of that to be a winning candidate? Hopefully, this will result in the news media actually looking at everything Mahmoud's claimed, especially his charity work. He claims to have a bunch of charities, and we should look into see if they actually exist. I mean, I'm not saying they can't be real, but it definitely deserves a second look, especially after a massive claim like this. And also in February, he was also already cited for ethics violations. So there's a lot going on with Mahmoud that needs to be checked out. But I have a feeling he's going to be left alone anyways, because to this point, the SFist story ran last week. Still have yet for anyone else to cover the topic. Also, in news that pisses off Yimbys, so it makes me really happy, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors this week overrode a veto from Mayor London Breed of a bill that preserves 15 to 20 blocks of historical San Francisco. The bill protects Jackson Square from overdevelopment, aka skyscrapers and similar buildings. It's a good thing, no matter what they say. The district encompasses what used to be the Barbary Coast and has history dating back to the 1850s. It also includes the historic North Beach neighborhood, which was a cultural hotbed for the West Coast in the 50s and 60s. And it's a waterfront area, so it shouldn't have some ugly high-rises clogging it all up. The veto pissed off Breed and genocide supporting state senator Scott Wiener, both of whom posted on Twitter claiming that bill is going to hold back housing production. Actually, it doesn't, because San Francisco has plenty of housing. Their available units are at a 13-year high. Also, there's tons of permits already out there for building, but developers aren't jumping on it because they're waiting on either rents to increase or who knows what else, some kind of costs to go down. Honestly, what Yimbys really want to do is make building in the city as profitable as possible. Charm be damned. Breed and Wiener are working for developers who don't even live in San Francisco. And what happens when you let developers get anything they want? You get Houston, one of the ugliest cities in the world. I have family in Houston, and I visit it quite frequently. And beyond the sprawl, it's just an ugly city. There's no buildings with any kind of history. It's just gross. And it perfectly exemplifies why zoning is important for cities. Now, for news in the category of possible apocalyptic future, we got to go down to San Jose. The Guardian, a British newspaper, spoke with the city's information technology department recently about how the city is using cameras and AI to develop a program that monitors the homeless. Basically, city officials invited tech companies to provide cameras to their city owned vehicles. They're using the images and the AI to identify homeless encampments in the area. And it leaves me wondering, can these intentions be any good? Seems to me like it's basically setting up more punishment for the unhoused in the name of preserving curb appeal, which is the only thing that truly matters to landlords and developers. Well, except for getting the highest rent they possibly can. With the grants pass case going in front of Supreme Court soon, it makes me think more punishment is coming from the in-house. That case, everyone expects the SCOTUS to say that homeless sweeps are legal, which is just going to punish the people that are already struggling. It's just hard not in this situation to think things are going to go from bad to worse for the unhoused here. Now let's get to the topic of today's episode. Oakland. As I've mentioned before, the town, as we locals call it, is going through the same kind of crap that San Francisco just went through a few years back. This time, instead of the district attorney and school board members being recalled, it's the county district attorney and the mayor. And it's the same old tactics. Special interests working with the media to make the city seem like it's going down the crapper. There's stories saying that crime is up, homelessness and drug use is rampant, and businesses are leaving. The Chronicle even made a huge deal of the one In-N-Out burger closing because the owners claimed it was about crime. If you've been following the stories about the rising crime rates in the Bay Area, you know that the retail associations and businesses are admitting that they've been inflating the crime issue. But hey, if the message works against progressive policies, might as well keep doing it. Now, the recalls are getting pretty intense. The one against Alameda County District Attorney Pamela Price has raised over $2 million. But thankfully, they're not gaining the kind of traction and support that San Francisco saw for its recalls. For example, the signature count for Price's recall keeps running into issues because officials keep finding errors. Driving a lot of the negative narrative about Oakland online are the same kind of trolls that San Francisco has. If you've been following SF politics, you know who I'm talking about, folks like Erica Sandberg and Tom Wolfe. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a troll in Oakland named Seneca Scott, who's kind of made it himself the face of the recall campaign for Oakland Mayor Sheng Tao. He's a former union organizer who ran for both Oakland City Council and mayor, and in 2014, with real estate developer Molly Westphal, he started Neighbors Together Oakland, a post-partisan organization for solutionaries. Nowadays, Scott is all about making Tao's Oakland look bad, even though she's been in the office for less than a year. But Scott has some issues, as pointed out by local reporter Mark Misoshnik in a recent piece for Left Coast Right Watch. Scott's publicly made anti-Semitic and homophobic comments, and he's even threatened the mayor. It's all in Mark's article, which you can find in the description of the show. I talked with Mark earlier this week about what he's learned about Scott, and then we went into a deeper discussion about Oakland's issues, especially in terms of the media narrative surrounding it. I talked with Mark earlier this week about what he's learned about Scott, and then we went into a deeper discussion about the issues Oakland is facing. Just before our interview, though, he published a personal essay about being an anti-Zionist Jew during Israel's current genocide in Palestine. I really suggest reading both stories, the Scott profile and his essay, which I will link to below in the description of the show. I also want to note that I had some brain farts during this interview, but Mark was pretty cool about it. I said that Twitter poster Mark Daniel Snyder posted the video from the Panda Express next to the In-N-Out burger, but it was actually Omar Yassin, who goes by Trash Night Heron on Twitter. So I'm sorry about that, and I promise to be better in the future. I'm going to provide links to the topics we discuss on our YouTube page, including the story about Oakland's new police chief, the Chronicle story about Oakland crime statistics, and background about Oakland's ceasefire strategy. That being said, enjoy my interview. All right. Hello, Mark. I'm speaking with Mark Misoshnik, who is a reporter for, is it Left Coast Right Wing Watch? Is that one of the, and I know you have your own Substack, but is that the publication you write for?
It's just called Left Coast Right Watch. Yep.
Okay, Left Coast Right Watch. Okay, great. And yeah, why don't you talk a little more about yourself? You're a journalist, and how long have you been reporting on the Bay Area?
I've been a journalist since the end of 2020. In the wake of the protests that were going on nationwide, I wanted to get involved in certain ways, and being disabled, I was very limited in what I could do. And I kind of just fell into doing journalism. I had been listening to a lot of podcasts and following a lot of journalists that were covering protests on the ground all through 2020, and realized that that's what I wanted to do. So I just decided to start one day. I was a photographer before that, so I sort of just transitioned into on the ground coverage. And as you mentioned, I am a writer for LCRW, and they kind of gave me my start. And now I work with them, and I run my own Substack. And yeah, so I've been a journalist for 3.5 years now.
Oh wow, and jumping right into the fire with it too, huh?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Like I cut my teeth covering goat thefts and like donkey basketball. So you probably have
Sure.
a lot more fun.
I mean, sure, if fun is being kettled by police, but
Yeah,
kind of is. So.
maybe a little more adventurous. Yeah.
Sure, sure.
Oh man, and you mentioned you're disabled. What do you mean by that? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, definitely. So I have an autoimmune condition called Crohn's disease that affects my small intestine, and so I'm pretty limited in what physical activity I can do. Luckily, I've been in remission for just over a year, but I go to treatment for it like every 6 weeks. I take an immunosuppressant pill once a week, stuff like that. And so writing kind of became like a very good escape for me because it's something I can do kind of no matter how I'm feeling. Just grab my laptop or my phone and just start writing.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Yeah, yeah, no. And yeah, especially if you're into writing, it's a great service you can do for your community. That's why I've always loved it, and I've always had such pride in this profession, even though it's kind of going down the shitter right now, in my estimation. Um but so let's get into your reporting though, especially this most recent story about Seneca Scott. First off, how did he come into your orbit? Why did you want to start looking into him?
A couple of years ago, I mean, in the wake of COVID and sort of this resurgence of austerity measures and conservative like ideology within the Bay Area and Oakland especially, he kind of rose out of that. He really got popular by just kind of being being online a lot, and going after people. He It didn't used to be that way. I know when he first ran for city council in 2016, I believe it was, he was kind of just your run of the mill community organizer, progressive, that kind of thing. But I think he realized that the grift is too lucrative, and I kind of was exposed to him against my will. I didn't seek him out, but I just constantly saw him keep popping up and saying some pretty heinous things. And eventually, I ended up reaching out to him to ask him some questions after Peter Liu, another candidate, called for a protest at a synagogue after saying some pretty anti-Semitic things because they didn't want him at a an event for the candidates. So I asked Seneca about it, and he was really cagey, and then ended up threatening me and then blocking me. And so I was like, okay, I think I should probably keep tabs on this guy. So that's kind of what I've been doing.
Yeah, and it seems like threatening people is a constant theme with him, especially anyone he finds as like an enemy. I mean, do you think it's a successful strategy for him, like, or purposeful strategy, or is he just unhinged?
I mean, I don't, I can only speculate so much. And it's definitely not effective. I mean, he famously got 3% of the vote for mayor in 2020, despite claiming that he was super popular all over Oakland, that everybody knew him, everybody loved him, all these kinds of things. And we can see that a lot of the rallies that he backs and things like that have pretty low turnout. A lot of the recall rallies against Tao, against DA Price, they're really not showing the numbers that they claim to have, and that's been pretty consistent. So I think it's a little column A, little column B.
So he's trying, but he just can't help himself.
I think that's kind of the theme of it. Yeah, is he gets really he's very prickly, right? And so he's apt to attack pretty much as soon as he feels like he's getting boxed in. So yeah.
Wow, and I mean, now it seems like they're pretty scary threats. I mean, he's a guy you've posted social media pictures of his gun collection and everything else. Is it a cause of for concern for people that are on his target list?
I would say I'm personally not very worried. I think that a lot of times when he shows up in public, it's always about the bark and not the bite. But I can understand why people are concerned, especially given his pretty vast firearm collection. Um, but if he's threatening public officials, if he's threatening activists, he's threatening journalists, saying they're going to feel the Second Amendment, or that they're going to pay for their fascism, or things like that. I think it's totally reasonable to be worried, and a couple of people have reached out to me that live near him or have dealt with him in the past, who kind of feel the same way, that they are a little bit worried about what he could do.
Mm, God, that's so scary. I mean, especially that's just the the worst side of politics, which seems to be almost increasing too, where not necessarily the politicians themselves, but you have all these kind of outlier, kind of not wannabe politicians, but just little shit stirrers. Like after the Gary Tan Tupac rap online,
Sure.
some of those targets of his received threats. Is it just I mean, how how did we get here?
I think there's a lot of different things to it. I think a lot of it is and I'm talking specifically about Seneca in this instance, but I think it's true about a lot of right wing, quote unquote centrist activists, where they realize that it's can be pretty lucrative to claim to be, former left, anti woke, all these kinds of things, and I think it feeds into some narcissism that a lot of these personalities have. And I'm not here to diagnose Seneca. I think that he is a narcissistic person, and I think this feeds into that. And he has a small group of sycophants on social media that are constantly trailing him. So if he quote tweets somebody, it's always like the same 10, 11 people, you know, talking shit in his wake because they have his back. And I just kind of blocked all of them at this point. It's just not worth it. There's no benefit to it. There's no real discourse going on, which is ironic because he talks about how he's past all this, he's past all the personal attacks and the ad hominems, but that's all he traffics in pretty much on a daily basis.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it online too. It's kind of insane. And yeah, you talk about the leftist claims too, and we should get into this. So he actually claims to be related to Coretta Scott King.
Yeah, and my understanding is that he is related to her, but the issue becomes he constantly uses that as a sort of he puts that on his resume, right? He says that as if being related to her automatically grants him some sort of legitimacy or progressivism. Uh, Meanwhile, her son, Martin Luther King III, said in an interview that he has no idea who this guy is. His family has no idea who this guy is. They've never met him. Nobody's claiming that they're not related. It's just a matter of how closely are they related, and what does that actually have to do with your organizing, your activism.
Yeah, and I mean, so then what is his relationship? Is it a very distant one? Is he like a second cousin or something?
My understanding is she's either his second or third cousin. I believe it's his mom. She's his mom's second cousin, something like that. I'd have to go back and listen to one of his interviews to remember exactly, but it's a slightly distant cousin.
Oh my gosh. So it's not like he's, walking in the marshes with them since an infant or anything like that. Oh,
Right,
that's ridiculous.
right.
Um, but so there's a lot of evil stuff to talk about with Scott. I mean the accusing a staffer of Taos of being a pedophile, his threatening of politicians, his anti-Semitic comments. Is there anything I'm missing? I mean, what in your estimation, like what are some kind of what are some of the worst things that he's done that we should be aware of?
I think you touched on them basically. I would say the threats are obviously the biggest concern right up front, but I think when you look at his history of bigoted rhetoric, I think it all just makes it that much more real and that much more scary. And not only did he accuse a staffer of being a pedophile strictly because he's queer, he's part of the LGBTQ community, but also accused his dads of molesting him, which is how he became a pedophile. Which is just recycling age old tropes about gay men and the queer community. Um, he calls the LGBTQ flag a pederast flag. He falls for 4chan hoaxes about how queer people want to welcome pedophiles into the movement. All these things of that a lot of right wingers will sort of fall into and get radicalized by when they're teenagers. It's super common, and it's one of the reasons I took interest in him is because I track a lot of right wing activity, and so I was seeing a lot of the same things here, even if he's not expressly right wing. And I would say the biggest thing is he interacts with neo-Nazi accounts on Twitter, and he's done it multiple times. And he's never said anything about it. And it's never to argue with them or talk to them or anything like that. It's to agree with whatever they're saying. A meme comparing, that insinuated that it was better to save Hitler than any trans person, right? For instance, and I just don't understand how he can be taken seriously in the Bay.
Yeah, but you brought this up earlier that I mean, there is a grift going on, and you're seeing these kind of commentators, especially they really pop up on social media. I mean, you have one group of people in San Francisco that like to film like drug addicts nodding out and be like, "Look how
Right.
terrible it is," even though it's like one part of this massive city. It's like, sure, if you hunt that stuff down, you can find it. But yeah, there's this push. And there's this grift of like pushing that doom loop narrative. Um, what, what I mean, in the bigger picture of things, what is the motivations? What are people like Scott there for?
It's interesting. I mean, I think when he first started his organizing and his work, I think he genuinely had a good vision for what he wanted to do for people in the community, and I think that he genuinely wanted to make things better. And I think that he was co-opted by people, on the right wing, Michael Schellenberger, Leighton Woodhouse, people that work for City Journal and Tablet Magazine and stuff. He's gone on Fox News multiple times. Um, I think that he sort of abandoned his ideals to help people in favor of pretending like he's doing something while making money for himself, while starting his own nonprofit that's backed by all these special interest groups, while claiming to be for working class Oakland, for grassroots movements. It's not true.
So he does the thing like Tom Wolfe, or
Yes,
Erica Sandberg. And does he actually? I didn't see because what's Schellenberger's foundation, Environmental Progress, and it's just all about
right.
pushing nuclear. But
Right,
as
exactly.
as as somebody who comes from Hanford, from the area of where they were building atomic bombs, I just want to say nuke is not the answer, but that's a whole other topic. But so is he? I mean, is his foundation? Do they get money from Schellenberger?
So it's not directly, but what does happen is he gets the platform, right? And Schellenberger has a very large platform across the country, but specifically when he talks about the Bay Area, they've been in conversation together. He's done interviews with Erica Sandberg, as you said. He's done a piece with Barry Weiss's Free Press, Christopher Rufo's City Journal, like all of these crypto. I almost hesitate to say crypto fascist, but that's kind of what they are, publications, right, to push his narrative. And it's no wonder he's just fallen into a very insular sort of media community. It makes sense that he's kind of spiraled here. And just recently, it's funny you mentioned Tom Wolfe, but Tom Wolfe recently, I think he had an issue with something Mayor Tao did in Oakland, and he tagged Seneca and then a neo-Nazi page, Clown World, right? So the connections just keep coming.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah. But it's just all evil, right? um, well, okay, so now you've been following beyond Seneca, have you been following what's going on in Oakland?
For the most part, yeah. I'm based in Berkeley, but it's inevitable to get news about neighboring areas, and I have a lot of friends and sources and other journalists in Oakland, so I'm pretty on top of it.
So, in my mind, there there's there's two recalls going on. There's the one against Sheng Tao, the mayor, and then there's the one against Pamela Price, the Alameda County District Attorney. Which, I mean, it blows my mind. It started the same year she started the job. So they're so blatantly political. Do you think like they will succeed like they did in San Francisco?
It's a good question. I think with Price, I think it's gonna be closer than we think. I'm personally of the mind that it won't happen. But it is really it is very close. Right now, I know that they've had to start a manual count because when they did the random sampling, they couldn't extrapolate to an acceptable signature threshold to put it on the ballot. And so we're still kind of just waiting to see what those numbers say. But with the amount of money that they've spent on this campaign, the amount of noise they've made, I think having it come down so tight is pretty telling, that they have to put in this much effort just to make it that close. As with regard to Shang Tao, I don't think that'll be successful at all. I think she is pretty popular. She's a lot more popular in Oakland than Price is in Alameda County for sure. And as much as I dislike pretty much every politician, there are things to say about her that she has definitely accomplished that I think opponents of the proponents of the recall, excuse me, won't necessarily be able to get past. I think Price has been a lot messier in terms of her communications and made it a lot easier to be attacked. I don't think Tao has that problem.
Mm. Yeah, it's true. She said, well, especially because of the Berkeley scanner and these new pop up publications that really focus on, and it's hard to say they're unbiased narratives when they're so critical and so one sided. With Berkeley Scanner, I mean, she was getting interviews with former Price employees that not even the not SFist, but the what's the not the Chronicle, what's the third San Francisco paper, and not the
SF
Examiner,
Gate?
SF Gate. SF Gate couldn't even get those. So there's clearly some connections there, but there's clearly like this biased narrative, and her kind of reaction to it has also given them kind of fodder. I mean, I don't know if you just saw that Berkeley Scanner is getting an award from the NorCal SPJ, which I worked with Emily, who is the Berkeley Scanner, and the turn I've seen has been so disappointing. But yeah, it's with Price, it's sad because she's not doing herself any favors. I mean, this is a well-respected civil rights attorney who finally, who was voted in. I mean, she deserves to be there, just like Chesa Boudin does. But I also too, knowing that this recall came, she's made some bad mistakes with banning Berkeley Scanner from press conferences, firing certain people. It's also too at that same end, seeing what happened to Boudin and how his own employees turned against him. You could also see where she's coming from.
Yeah, I agree, and I mean, I when Berkeley Scanner first started, I really respected her. I personally don't like the idea of crime reporting in general. I think it's one thing to notify people when things are going on and there might be active dangers, but I think this sort of literally scanning the police radio and talking about every single crime that happens, I don't think that benefits anybody. And so I'm of the same mind where I'm pretty disappointed, kind of where she's gone from Berkeley side, and she clearly does have some connections that are left, as you mentioned, in order to get those interviews. And it's not so much the bias that she has that I have a problem with, because obviously we all have bias, and I'm open about mine. And the problem is that she claims, she purports to be like an unbiased source, an unbiased journalist. Um, which I think is ridiculous, because if you look at her coverage, it's very clearly slanted. Which again, that's fine, but just be open about it. She promoted the recalls on her page. She made a huge meal out of Price banning her from that press conference. Which, to be clear, she never should have been banned. I was never in support of that, and I'm glad that she was reinstated. I don't think that ever should have happened. It was a huge mistake. But to then, win an award for that while also speaking on the side of capital in the state, and just recently fawning over a war criminal, Condoleezza Rice, speaking at UC Berkeley, it's kind of hard to say like, hey, yeah, you're speaking truth to power. And that all coincided with the very beginnings of the recall push. So yeah, it's been pretty disappointing.
Yeah, especially when she dropped out from Berkeley side to start Berkeley Scanner, the timing was very weird. It was kind of like right before all the recall stuff happened. So talking about Berkeley Scanner, and I think a lot of it too is the fact that with crime reporting, um, that it is like a big part of the now model for news publications, especially TV news. If TV didn't have those shots of the car crashes on the freeway, of the bullet markers on the streets after a shooting and stuff, they'd have a lot of holes. They would not be able to fill a lot of time. But then at that same end, um, you can see the police use that leverage to ensure they get the kind of coverage they want. And I think for me, the Berkeley Scanner is almost an example of where that it's so organically tied that it starts from the beginning, where it's almost like they agreed from the beginning. All right, I want to do this coverage and stuff. What do you need from me? And I can't prove that. I am just saying this, but I've been in this business for 20 years. I've worked even with her, and it's hard not to see that. And what's so sad is she gets way more play and way more platformed than you do with, say, your piece about Seneca Scott, who's somebody who deserves to be seen more, and especially this other side of him, which probably the majority of the public don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I think, I think to be fair though, she has, a pretty big body of work following her. And so I think that definitely, of course, will help with the platform. But, I agree. I think the state of local media in general is abysmal, to be nice about it. And that's part of it. It's like you said, there's that old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. And that's kind of what is going on now. And, Berkeley has, I've lived here for almost a decade, and it's never been like a scary place. It's never been like a super dangerous place. Things happen, of course. It's, that's how cities are. I grew up in Brooklyn, right? So this is this is nothing to me. Like I heard gunshots from my window and stuff every night. So it's weird to have your whole feed just be like, here's somebody robbing a car today, here's somebody robbing a bank today. It's like, how does that actually affect everyone? It all it does is really like make people scared. It gives you the perception that crime is like continuously rising. And like you said, it gives fodder to police, right? You know, they can point to it and say, hey, look at all this reporting on crime that's going on. That means that we need more funding to fight it. And she's been pretty open about supporting that too, between Berkeley PD and UCPD. So it's pretty, like you said, it's intertwined.
Yeah, and especially too when the facts show, or at least statistics show, cops don't prevent crime. This crime, it will still be happening, especially like broken windows, like car theft. Like you're still going to see that unless you have, constant monitoring and stuff. And do people really want to live in a police state? I don't think so. Especially, I don't think Berkeley's known for that. That's for sure. But speaking of crime statistics, that also brings up the Chronicle brought up their crime stat about Oakland, a story about crime stats in Oakland, and finding that there's pockets of crime. Some areas are more crime filled than others. Now, I have a kind of problem with the piece because, again, though it shows some scary graphs that go back to 2009, we're still seeing this kind of adjustment to the pandemic. From where we saw a serious drop in crime because no one wanted to be around each other, to, kind of the adjustment back. And now, too, with costs going up, inflation, everyone's being evicted. That to me is the real sources of crime. Now, the graphs look bad, everything's bad, but is it the crisis that the media would want you to think it is?
Definitely not. Um, you know, there are statistics that I was looking at, the crime statistics, and in a lot of facets, some crimes are going up for sure. Burglary, robbery, these things are, and it's kind of the main issue that people think of when they think of the Bay Area, right? Bipping cars. I've had my catalytic converter stolen, things like that. And for sure, it's an issue. I don't want it to happen to anybody, but I think the idea that throwing more money at police to go patrol the neighborhoods like they ever do that anyway will help. And it really is a tale as old as time. Broken windows policing has not been shown to work. What really works is improving on wealth disparities and income inequality and making sure people are secure with food and housing and healthcare and all these things. If you don't have a viable route to make money for yourself or your family, what kind of other choice do you have? That's not to say that it's okay or that it's right to do these things, but it is the reality, and it's kind of the reality in cities. And wealth inequality has only increased, in the wake of the pandemic. Billionaires have made way more money. The working person has started making way less money. Unemployment's gone down. Eviction moratoriums have ended. You know, all of these things create a perfect storm for really chaotic conditions, and it's very easy to say, just don't commit crime, or if you do, you have to go to jail. But that is such a short-sighted way of looking at things and doesn't really tackle the heart of the issue. um, I think it's easy. People feel comfortable, people feel safe saying, let's throw more police at it because that's what they know. But I just don't think statistically that's borne out at all.
Yeah, yeah, there's still recidivism. Like you're still gonna these criminal like getting arrested once does not stop it. They even just showed that with the capital punishment. They've even just showed that with the death penalty. It doesn't
Right.
deter people. It doesn't deter people. It's kind of, yeah, I remember actually talking. I had a sociology professor when I was an undergrad talk about like when he was a parole officer starting out, the first people they gave him were the murderers. Not to give them the hardest work, but to give them the easiest work, because after they've been in prison forever, they're just so much older and they move on. And that's why you see in like Scandinavia, they don't have the death penalty. It's like 20 years. And guess what? Like all the murder feelings are out of them, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that throwing people into cages and torturing them every day is any way going to make them better and not just going to make them more angry and more violent, more resentful. There's no rehabilitation that happens. So what's even the point, right?
Yes. Especially if
Yeah,
they have to see their families suffer and everything else because you can't be out there working for them. Yeah.
exactly.
Well, and it's funny though too, because there's also kind of a counter narrative going on with the crime as well. Like, you have the whole big story, the big push about the In-N-Out burger closing. Oh my God, the only In-N-Out burger is closing. You know, everyone right on the streets. We've lost something so important to us. But now they, what was it? Mark Daniel Snyder on Twitter. He posted a video of the Panda Express, which is literally in the same parking lot as the In-N-Out burger, and it's packed, and it's people coming in and out all the time. So it's this weird, I mean, it's there's such, it's so not cut and dry. It's so like there's something not, the nuances aren't being included in the media coverage. So I mean, have you seen that stuff? Like, are you seeing the, like, the difference between the media narrative and the reality?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, talk about pretty much any big name closure in Oakland, and it's always followed by the same group of people going, "Oh, see, this is just evidence that businesses want to leave." And you know, like you said, it does ignore the big picture because with a lot of them, I want to see their annual financials. I want to see what their plans were. There were places that said that they were going to close a few years ago and are just following through. There's an In and Out in Arizona that has had cops called there like 30 times this year alone that they're not shutting down. So, is it really crime? What is the main thing, or is it just that there are tough financials and it's an easy scapegoat and people will like gladly, jump onto that? I mean, it was a pretty ridiculous response. I mean, to the point where the Oakland NAACP released a flyer for a prayer vigil at that In and Out in the parking lot. I just don't even know what to say about that.
I know. It's like a memorial for a fast food restaurant. What has happened to our
That's owned
society?
by a conservative Trump supporter. That's the other part of it. So, is it really any great loss?
No, no, no. There's definitely other. Hey, we still have nations, people. Don't forget nations.
Oh yeah, fantastic. Love that two-egger breakfast. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. And those milkshakes. Um,
Oh, phenomenal.
so now one thing that Tao said, so she hired a new police chief. I don't know how people are feeling about it. It seems kind of neutral. But there's also discussions of bringing back the ceasefire program to decrease violence. Now my issue or like my one question about the ceasefire programs, it seemed like it was very focused on gang fighting and that kind of stuff. Do you think that's the issue now of what's going on? Is that the gangs are on the rise?
It would be purely speculation on my part. I don't wanna say anything I don't know for sure. It's not anything I've seen. It's also not anything I've really seeked out.
Mm,
So I can't say for sure one way or another. What I know is that the ceasefire program has a pretty good track record of reducing gun violence in the city of Oakland. And it does, in my opinion, need to be re-implemented. I think it's the very bare minimum that could happen. I think intervening before things escalate is crucial because otherwise all you're doing is cleanup, right? And you're never going to solve the problem by doing cleanup and torturing people for being involved in violence against other people. So I think there's a long way to go, but I think ceasefire is a good start, and I hope it comes back soon.
mm. Yeah, good point. Good point. And speaking of ceasefire, you ran a great essay you wrote about what's going on in Israel and Gaza. You have a very, I don't want to say, it's not necessarily unique, but it is a part of a small but growing perspective on what's going there. Being an American Jew who has gone through birthright and everything, and actually doesn't like what you've seen there. Um, I guess, it's, first off, I want to get into the birthright thing because I think it's very interesting. It's been described as a timeshare pitch. Would you agree with that description?
Uh, yeah, I think to a certain extent it is. I think what it's more of is it's trying to make you emigrate to Israel. That is really the main thing, and then the secondary goal is to make you believe that Israel is a safe haven for Jews that you should be supporting, even if you don't move there.
Yeah. And as a Gentile, I really like. I've only been on kind of the edge of it, so I'm not for certain. How strong is that push of that narrative of like we're not safe without this country. What we're never going to be safe unless we have this country. I mean, how strong is that?
It's huge. I mean, speaking from personal experience, it's pretty much a day one kind of thing. You know, you grow up. I grew up learning I was Jewish, I was Ukrainian, that I could speak Russian, and that Israel is the home of the Jews, and like that's it. That's all you learn. And I go into it a little bit more in the essay, but I was bar mitzvahed. I went to Jewish summer camp. I worked at Jewish summer camp. I worked at an Orthodox Jewish pharmacy. So I've been surrounded by it my whole life, and there was almost nobody throughout that whole experience that had anything bad to say ever about Israel. It was always Israel is great. Arabs are dangerous. We shouldn't trust Muslims. Like we need to have a safe place for ourselves. Israel has a right to exist. Israel has a right to defend itself. My whole entire life.
Man, yeah. And it's just so scary to watch because it does feel like what's happening is inevitable at this point because of how the powers that be react to it. And like in the case of like it's hard, but it's almost feel like it's cult driven. Like I feel like because it's not just Netanyahu, it's Itamar Ben Giver, it's Smolek, it's Daniela White Weiss. Like it's almost like multiple heads of a Jim Jones like figure, pushing this forward. And it's so scary to see it be just pushing through and pushing away. What now? But many have said who support Israel say this could be the end of Israel. How do you see that coming to fruition?
I think it's I think it's a little too optimistic, honestly. I think that they're in such a position now where it's kind of too late to back down at all, right? It's this sunk cost thing of we've gone this far already. Like this is what we have built our ideology on. Anything against that would disprove it, I think, and so they can't do that. Um, that's why Biden can't rein Netanyahu in. That's why the U.S. just won't do anything pretty much to stop what's going on because it's just too far gone at this point to admit that they're wrong is not something that Israel and the US are known to do in the past, so I don't think it's going to happen in the future. I think that there's a really big coalition now of anti-Zionism that's only been growing. I've never seen sort of this public perception of Israel the way that it is now, where people kind of see it for what it really is because we have live feeds, we have social media, we have these things are happening right before our eyes and nobody can deny it as much as they try to. And I think that's made a really, really big difference. I think for people who are maybe on the fence and still call themselves Zionists, maybe the more liberal or the more progressive ones, I think are starting to see the cracks in the foundation. And I think that we need to keep pushing on that because that's the only way that we're going to change things. We're not going to change the minds of the people that are in power, that are the far right. We need to do grassroots labor organizing to stop stop this genocide, stop the mass destruction that Israel perpetrates.
Awesome. Well, I think our time is wrapping up. So, but I appreciate your time, Mark. Thank you so much. And I'm going to put all the links to your stories on the page in the comments or in the description. I suggest everyone read them because they're both fantastic. Completely different topics, both worth your time.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, till later. Have a good one.
Thanks, you too.
And that's it for this episode of the Doomloop Dispatch. Thank you so much, Mark Misoshnik, for speaking with me. And again, you can find the links to his stories in the description on the YouTube page. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube page, or if you just listen to the audio podcasts, please leave a review on Spotify or Apple. It all helps. I promise at some point I'll get a Patreon page and even an Instagram. I mean, I got to get with the kids, right? That's what the kids are doing. Instagram. Should I do a TikTok? I don't know. Something will happen at some point. It's just running slow because I can barely get time to put together these episodes anyways. Hence why they're always coming in the middle of the afternoon. Now, before I go, I want to take note about the death of former Senator and Vice Presidential candidate Joe Lieberman, who died yesterday from a fall at the age of 82. I just want to say, rest in piss. For me, Lieberman was the first rotating villain I had to deal with in the Senate. So before there was Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, you had Lieberman, who back when the ACA was getting together, the Affordable Care Act was being put together under President Obama. He was the guy that shut down any possibility of a public option in the Affordable Care Act. When he had the chance to save millions of lives, he chose to protect corporate profits. And for that, I will say again, rest in piss. And hopefully, Americans like you and I can come together and prevent rotating villains from ever damaging our country like that again. We need to care about the people, not profits. So that being said, have a wonderful week, and remember to keep fighting the good fight.